For the final time in 2023, this is the Final Word Cricket Podcast with Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon, Season 15, Episode 17. We're sat in a park next to the Melbourne Cemetery at the Mindfulness Table, and we're about to do our New Year's Eve show. As we do every year, we don't typically do it on the morning of New Year's Eve, but we planned to do this yesterday. We planned to do it on the 30th and release it on the 31st, but 4-day finish. We went out on night 4. We had a fairly decent hit out as well, and had we recorded yesterday, neither of our voices would have worked quite so well.
Well, yeah, it might have had less clarity of thought and more, maybe less mindfulness. I've got to say, it wasn't deliberate to choose a mindfulness table. We just chose a table in a park, but it happens to be about mindfulness.
It encourages you to take your shoes off. I read the plaque before. It said it wants you to sit here barefooted. We're not doing that. Oh, you have?
Yeah.
You've honoured
I've honoured the request.
Okay.
Right? This is what it's all about. Because we just had a golden retriever coming up to make friends with us as well. So hopefully we'll meet some dogs over the course of this show. Yep. But doing it outside in a park where you can, that seems like a good thing to do. And maybe it's about mindfulness because this is the end of year review. Yep. This is the best and worst of 2023. We'll get to that in the second half. But this is where we think about the year that was, what it brought us, what it didn't. And so, maybe it's appropriate.
Yeah, we'll try and be in the present as you're meant to be when you're meditating.
Or recording a podcast.
But equally,
what if it's a history podcast?
Then how do you manage
be in
that?
the present and be in the past? How can it be the morning of New Year's Eve?
I'll ask Tom Holland.
We'll
find out. So a great night on night 4. A lot of Final Word people were floating around as well, Jeff. It's kind of nice that when we go out in Melbourne and have a bit of a dance around, that people are like, oh, you guys make that podcast that we listen to. I'm like, yeah, we do. That's great. So nice to meet you. Do you want to talk about cricket?
Let's drink a beer about it.
So that was part of it, and here we are. So the last time we communicated with you, we were at the MCG, and there is a little bit of follow up of that Test match, bit of wash up, shall we say, the Melbourne Test match. Yep. The bit that jumped out most to me was actually in relation to a YouTuber who we get a lot of requests in our comments to do a collab with John Boy, who's the American sports YouTube commentator, I suppose, analyst, who's found his way into cricket, and he's an excellent cricket analyst as well. I mean, given cricket's not his first sport, he seems to have really thrown himself into it and understands the guts of the game, and he found something that I don't think any of us did at the time with Rizwan and the controversial decision. By the way, Mohammed Hafiz completely teed off at the press conference, attributing the cursed use of technology to why Pakistan lost.
That's strong. That is implying that the occult has been involved. Was that Nick Hockley? Was that a Cricket Australia thing to get witchcraft involved?
Well, I'll read you the quote. I believe inconsistent umpiring and technology curse has really given us the result which should have been different. So he thinks if not for the Rizwan friction point, they would have gotten over the line. At least that's how he felt in that emotional moment. And I get it. You're sitting in the MCG, you've lost a Test match that for about 5 minutes that felt like they could have won. Haven't 16 in a row in Australia and so on. Daniel Russell wrote a great piece about that. That day, by the way, on Cricket Info about from the fans being there, sat behind the goals at the Shane Warne stand end, and how they are experiencing it and feeling so close to witnessing something incredibly special for only to fall short, and by a margin that in context isn't that big.
It's a margin that makes it tempting, but it's not a margin that meant they were going to win. No. Like, as you said on the Daily Show, Rizwan had every opportunity, he'd been given not out, to get out another way, doing something else after that, because it's hard to make match-winning runs. It's hard to score big match-winning innings. They would have needed to score 1 run less in the 4th innings than Australia scored in the 1st. So,
and he was batting by that stage, probably more Salmon than him. They were batting in quite an enterprising way. They were batting with risks, and that's fine. They were trying to make sure they never got to the second new ball. It all made sense, but still, they did fall, as you say, a fair way short of the finish line. And the Rizwan bit with John Boy, just to come back to that, is that he's basically been sprung for doing something very Rizwan-esque. You can probably tell if you're listening to watching this show. We quite like the way Rizwan goes about it. He's very over the top, very dramatic, very theatrical, and when he was given not out by Michael Goff, and as the Australians were weighing up whether to review or not, Rizwan kept pointing to his arm, and the mark on his arm. He was rubbing
it initially. He was like, "Ooh, that really hurt." Where it got me on the arm.
And in doing so, that mark, it's a big white mark, which, when you think about it now, I don't think a welt comes up immediately as white. Anyway, I digress.
No. It looked more like a graze that was healing to me.
Maybe it was.
Like he lost some skin there another time, but it was old, lost skin.
Right. And anyway, he was pointing at that mark, and I think that part of even our conversation the other night might have even, I don't know whether we referenced it, we certainly referenced it on radio, that it was odd that having been adjudicated as flicking the top of the glove, that there'd be this mark on his arm and there was an inconsistency there and maybe it was an illusion and so on. But yes, the mark was absolutely there before the incident.
When he came out to bat.
There's shots of him coming out to bat and there's a close-up on his arm and the mark's there. So Rizwan, I think that kind of sums up the way he goes about it. Drama kid.
Bit of stage makeup.
Yep.
Got a bit of pancake out.
Yep.
Like preempted it. In case I get hit on the arm. Well, you should have just cut your wristbands in half. Why do you have such big wristbands?
There you go.
As we've gone through.
So that's the major wash-up from the Australia-Pakistan test, Jeff.
As for the technology curse, Mohammed Hafiz, we all suffer from the technology curse, my friend. We all have phones with social media apps on them, like brain vampires leeching our attention, making us sit there and ignore our family and friends, destroying our short-term memory, ruining our relationships, rabbit-holing and red-pilling our friends and loved ones. We've all got the technology curse, buddy. It's not just you, okay? You're not a special case here.
And the other side of the curse, no one's chargers work.
No.
There's always fucking problems with the cables.
No, chargers work. And they're inconsistent. They keep going, oh, we've got a new kind of charger now. Oh, great, a new kind of charger. Awesome. I look forward to not being able to charge anything, even though there are 16 chargers in this room.
We'll have USB-C for everything, and then we'll all have 27 USB-C cables because none of them fucking work, right? So, the technology curse afflicts all of us.
Right.
Mohammed Hafiz, who we all like the professor, by the way. It's not personal. It might get personal in America.
Can I throw in one more? One last little bit. I remember I said on the Daily I had a Hall of Fame I couldn't remember.
Oh, okay.
And it was wardrobe related.
Yeah.
I finally remembered what it was. Maybe long time listeners might remember Tom Cowie from the White Line Wireless days, who's also an esteemed reporter for the artist formerly known as Fairfax Papers. Saw Tom in the bull ring on day 3 or day 4, whatever it was, wandering around. Thought something looks a bit odd with this picture. He's wearing a pair of thongs, for our international listeners, flip-flops.
In the MCC?
In the bull ring. And I was like, how did you get in? He's like, I have no idea. I just walked up and nobody stopped me.
Brilliant.
How did that happen? It was the most unusual thing I saw all week.
Noted. Maybe you should try it on with your bare feet next time you're using your MCC membership.
Sure.
See how you go.
I'll just say Justin Langer told me to do it.
Justin Langer sent me here.
South Africa, this is... Well, when you're talking about shambolic situations, the test squad that they've just named for New Zealand, which contains almost none of the players who are currently playing against India and just beat India soundly inside 3 days at Centurion. It's an interesting time to be following South African cricket.
It is. So 14 players named for this squad. We always knew it was going to be something of a replacements squad. 7 uncapped players. Now, where I'm even more exercised about this than I have been before, South Africa have just won their first test of the new WTC cycle, right? They've knocked off India in really impressive fashion by an innings. We'll come to that in a moment. That was the Boxing Day test played at Centurion. But you go through South Africa's WTC draw, the 6 series they play, I reckon they're a decent chance of reaching the top 2, or they might be anyway. India are by far their toughest opponent at home. They play Bangladesh and the West Indies away. They could conceivably sweep both of those series. Bangladesh are in a bit of a trough, and the West Indies are nowhere near it. At home, in addition to South Africa, in addition to India, my apologies, they play Pakistan and Sri Lanka. You'd think they do well in both of those series. The only other series they have away from home is this New Zealand 2-test tryst coming up in a couple of weeks. So this might be what prevents or denies them. In the very same way they were willing to risk World Cup qualification this time last year for the SA20.
Yep.
They had to go through the last gasp final qualification spot. They did get there and they made the semi-finals. But, there was no sure thing they were going to get to that spot. They were willing to really chance their hand there. And on this occasion, they're willing to jeopardise what could be a relatively cushy path through to the final of the World Test Championship, acknowledging that it's done on percentage of wins. If they lose 2-0 here, it'll make it that much harder. And what a bloody shame, given we're crying out for the WTC to be as competitive as it can be, that it's been compromised in this way by a side who, on paper at least, and indeed on the basis of the results we've seen recently with them at home and the way they played this week, they could be a contender.
And on percentage of wins, if you're playing a shorter series, then it gives you less opportunity to maybe jag a win somewhere because you're much more likely to get stomped in the first couple. And New Zealand at home, fairly formidable. I don't think they'll be holding back. The New Zealand team will be will be pissed off, really, that they're getting sent this side, and it's not a slight on the players. There are some decent players there. I mean, Dwayne Olivier was someone we speculated about coming back for this series, and he will. David Bettingham got called up to this current series, and so he's around. Neil Brand, experienced first-class captain, but is it Lee Jamon the last time that you've got a captain on debut in a game that's not the side's first ever match?
It probably is. And look, I feel sorry for Brand, who's taking over as the captain. I mean,
maybe Floyd Reefer when the Windies went to Bangladesh with the second team.
Good shout.
Was it 2011?
Yeah, it's a good shout. But I mean, you go through it. There are players who are in this current squad. David Bettingham, you mentioned before, who's earned it. I mean, I know he went Colpack, but his results in England, he made the better part of 1,000 runs before the end of May a couple of years ago. So he's got a higher ceiling than most who they can call off the bench, and made runs against India last week. Keegan Peterson, who until very recently was in the first choice South African team, a lot of experience.
Kaya Zondo's going as well, isn't he?
Who
has been in the first choice team?
I think he was the weakest of the top 6 I saw last year in England and in Australia.
But he had moments in Australia where you could see the ability there.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. And Hamza, who's been playing against India this week, so they have got some there.
But it's very hard not to draw the conclusion that this is why Dean Elgar retired.
Completely
would retire after this series, because he said, because he's such a staunch and stern-minded sort of person, he would have said, "Fuck this shit. I am not going on this horse and donkey show." I don't know. Is that a phrase? No, it's probably not.
Whatever it is, horse and cart show.
I don't know. Back of a trailer kind of thing. I'm not doing this half-assed, not really a test team. Like, I'm somebody who played with Graham Smith, AB de Villiers, Hashim Amla, Dale Steyn. Like, I played in the great sides. I played with great players, and I'm not going to be part of seeing this test team degraded to this point.
Because so many people speculated, we probably did as well, that he'd be captain of this team, and he's made his way back on the basis of his first-class results. He's made 100, big 100, defining 100 against India. I'm with him. I wouldn't want to be part of it if I were him either. Dwayne Olivier is the second best strike rate in Test match history. He's no mug. He will be a formidable bowler in New Zealand conditions, as probably will Dane Peterson. I watched him bowl for Notts last year. He is the kind of guy who thrives in England. You'll think in New Zealand he's got sufficient skills to do well there as well. But yeah, then we're into uncharted territory. I thank Firdaus Munda for going through this on Cricinfo. I picked up some of this from her article, but batters who we just simply haven't heard of before because they've never made it to this level and may not have ever thought they would. Reynard von Tonda, Ruan de Schwartz, and they're going to bat in the top 6, evidently. Bowlers here, Mpongwana and Moreki, they're 2 seamers. An extra spinner, Sean Van Berg, who's 37 years old, making his debut potentially as a leg spinner.
That's right in our areas, though.
Yeah, I do like that.
Hope he takes a 10.
I hope Sean gets a go. And the keeper, their backup keeper, it will be their keeper. Sorry, looking through the squad. Clyde Fortune, who's
he's been around.
Yeah, he's been around, but averages 27 with the bat in first-class cricket, right? I think in Firdaus's piece, he's got the 5th highest batting average, and that's not everything, but it gives a sense of where they've dredged their players from for this.
Maybe we're taking a negative view on this, and maybe we need to think of it as more like, say we're going to have a 150th anniversary Test match in 2027, for instance. This is more like a tribute to early 20th century South African Test teams, where they would just shit house a bunch of the time, and it was just a bunch of random dudes who they plucked out of, you played a tour game for Orange Free State against the visiting MCC or whatever, and you took 3 for 40. You're in the Test team.
Well, especially with Sean Von Berg, the wrist spinner, given with wrist spin, it's how South Africa did take some big scalps before World War I. So, I don't mind that. I think that's one part of this that's of interest to me.
Can they play on matting? Can they get New Zealand to agree to a matting pitch?
Yeah, that would be an extra check. So, it's not the player. I want to come back to this. It's not the player's fault. I hope they do their country proud. I hope they pull off a miracle. We'll follow the series closely. But CSA and those who've been responsible for allowing a domestic T20 comp take precedence over a Test series as part of the World Test Championship. They're the ones who need to be scrutinised. They're the ones who shouldn't get off the hook for this. This is bad. This is a sign of things to come, and this will be something that I'm sure comes up in our review of the year and other storylines like this in the second segment of the show today.
And it's not entirely unfamiliar or unrelated with the West Indies squad, so
Yeah.
you've got 231 tests of experience in the Windy squad. 216 of them come from 4 players who are the usual suspects: Craig Brathwaite, Kemar Roach, Elzari Joseph, Josh De Silva. And even then, De Silva's only played 22 test matches.
Yeah,
so
that's
it's
it.
not like he's a super experienced player.
Yeah, the 5th most experienced player in the side, is in the squad rather, is Tagenarine Chanderpaul. He's played 8 test matches.
Okay.
So this is all from CA's number crunching during the week that we picked up as well, I should say. But yeah, this is... I interviewed with Jared Todd Greenberg on our coverage this week, and he is trying to... his best, I think, and he does a great job of doing this, of explaining that we need to be prepared for this discomfort. That this is going to happen more and more. That Jason Holder and Kyle Mayers, what a debut last year, a double 100, batting 4th, winning a test, chasing 390 odd. It was such a great story, such a great beacon of hope of sorts for West Indian cricket.
Yeah.
That only a couple of years on from that, he's declining a national contract. He's prioritising. I can't remember which one Holder and which one Mayers is in. One's in South Africa, one's at the ILT20.
Yeah.
I know Holder's made a big contribution to West Indies cricket. I have more sympathy for him, although
He served his time.
Although he has said he's not ruling out playing Test cricket in the future. But Kyle Mayers, I know
he's
he
probably
didn't...
ruling out coming to Australia and getting pumped again, because he knows that that's not a lot of fun. And if you could do that, or you could go and make a huge bunch of money in a couple of weeks, you can understand going, okay, I'm not going to bother with a series that we don't even have a prospect of winning, as opposed to, say, playing England at home in the Caribbean or something like that, where they've historically been so competitive.
Well, this is it, right? This is why they've not taken the contracts, because they can't be
bound
to touring. And this is, I guess, Greenberg's point really about the way in which the international game is going to have to evolve to accommodate players who no longer wish to be part of this. And for the Windies, it's been a longer run story, hasn't it? We don't even talk about Shai Hope being a test player anymore. Nicholas Pooran, who's had a fabulous year in short form cricket.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that he's in the most gifted 6 batters in the West Indies. They've just knocked off England comprehensively in a white ball series. That side of their game's going as fine as it has since the 2016 World Cup. But the side they are bringing out here, I fear for them. Jaden Seals, who has got that experience from bowling in Australia last year, along with Kemar Roach and Elzari Joseph, he's injured with a shoulder complaint, so he can't come out. So they are right up against it for those test matches at Adelaide and Brisbane, with, again, like it was with South Africa, 7 uncapped players who'll be making the trip. And
I suppose then it brings you back to South Africa and back to India, and just how well South Africa played in that Boxing Day test. Rabada ripped them up. Elgar makes 185, almost his highest score. He's got that 199 as well. Never quite cracked a double ton, so had the opportunity there. And to do that on a surface where, I was watching that third innings, what ended up being the final innings, when Kohli was batting through and everybody else was falling apart. I think it was 9 single-figure scores, and then Kohli made 76.
Kohli made 76, a 58%er. Shubman Gill made 30 odd,
23 maybe,
and the rest is all single digits. So their partnership was the only vaguely credible part of it. I did see a little bit of suggestions that the South Africans had doctored the pitch, which is quite funny considering they made 400 plus when they had their turn.
It does sound a bit familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Comes up every time. Funny that.
But it was a difficult pitch. It was doing heaps, but from that sort of back of a length, it was inconsistent bounce. Some of those South African pitches are absolutely horrible to bat on. After about day 3, the one that India got last time they toured, was it the Joburg one that time? Were they playing at Wanderers? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, I remember that. So that was before we were there, that's a long time ago, isn't it? No, sorry, it's 2 years ago.
Yeah,
there's a series in between that I'm missing. Yeah,
but it was all over the place. Again, it was over in 2.5 days, and that was a shocker to bat on. I don't know if this one was quite as difficult, but it was just bowling quality. Shami's not there. They had Prasidh Krishna come in. He got absolutely belted. Shuttle Tucker was ineffective as that sort of backup seamer. Ashwin was back in the side, which a bit of a hiding to nothing. You've missed the whole World Cup, but why don't you go and play in South Africa and see how that works out?
He's not been getting a game in what they call the SENA countries, Ashwin, and he gets one here and they lose. Bumrah still took 4 for in the first dig, so they're well led by him. But Marco Jansen down the list, making 84 not out for South Africa. The 2 left armers, Nandre Berger, who you include Coetzee, who barely bowled in the game or didn't have a huge influence in the game.
And he's injured. He's out of the next test.
With Rabada, who was magnificent on that first day. Some of those wickets, including the ball to Kohli, which is to die for. Then you've got KL Rahul making 100 against the odds. It's funny, KL Rahul, I think isn't he a complete charlatan, worst player to ever represent India, a disgrace to the men in blue. That's just after the World Cup. I was reading all of that because they didn't win the World Cup final. Right. No overreactions required there. Okay.
He was in shocking touch earlier this year when he was playing in the Test series at the start of the year. He was gone.
Sure,
and he somehow managed to go away and get his rhythm back, but he was nowhere as a batter at
I'm
that
just
point.
thrilled that he's made a comeback that's got him making Test hundreds again. You're right. When we were there in India earlier this year, his numbers had fallen off a cliff, but some of the theatrics around KL Rahul online are just ridiculous. But he is a player of real class, and we've seen him do it in these types of conditions before. I remember at the Oval in 2018, it would have been, making 100 on the final day on a pitch that was sporting the whole way through. More power to him. Batting down the list as well, KL Rahul there wasn't batting in the top three. He was being used as a Test opener in his previous time in the Test side. But Rabada leading that attack. Of course, he won't be doing it when they're in New Zealand, which is such a shame. Nor any of those quicks because they're all playing in the SA20.
Yeah.
So I do feel for Rabada on out of almost any of them, Rabada almost the most. Like we talk of Pat Cummins, we did the other night, as being someone who may already be in the best 11 Australia. If you're making a fictional side of the best Australian 11, that Cummins will be near enough to it already at maybe the halfway mark of his career, maybe a little bit further in than that. Similar situation for Rabada. He's got an extraordinary Test record, the better part of 300 Test wickets, but how many more will he be able to add to it when they're only playing 2 Test match series?
4 or 6 a year.
Yeah, well, they're only playing 2 against India at home.
Yeah.
Now, India had never won in South Africa, but they've got this formidable record in Australia of late. It's surprising that they haven't.
I thought it was daft that India agreed to play a 2-test series. Why would you? Because you're probably going to get ambushed at some point.
So play 3 to
give yourself the possibility. After all of the World Cup final should be best of 7 chat. Surely give yourself a few more games to play. But seriously, if you want to, it's been marked as this bucket list item and this thing particularly that Kohli really wanted to win a series in South Africa. Okay, well make sure you're playing 4 tests, not 2. Make sure and make sure that you absolutely fight with the administrators to carve out some prep time. Kohli batted in that last innings like somebody who has been to South Africa several times and knows how to bat there, weirdly enough, whereas everybody else didn't. So give yourself the opportunity, give yourself a couple of weeks, play a couple of practice games. Actually, like I know the schedule is congested, but if you actually want it, if you really want it, then you have to set aside, you have to make that extra effort, you have to sacrifice something else. And if you're not willing to do that, genuinely didn't want it enough.
Well, England have suffered similar criticism this week. I think some of the players are getting to India before the first test, only 3 days ahead of it.
Yeah.
Steve Harmison was very critical of that planning, and again, everybody knows how difficult scheduling is, but it's made more challenging when players are in a situation where they're able to make nationally contracted players can prioritise the domestic T20 comps in such a way that it compromises Test cricket. It just doesn't. You're right. There's got to be some push-pull, but it can't always be in one direction. And it feels like at the moment, when there's needing to be something sacrificed, it's the prospects in Test cricket that hit the fence first.
And the prospects in women's Test cricket increasing a little bit. Australia playing India after India knocked off England. Similar kind of result. It's interesting how, because these Indian women have played so little long-form cricket, the template still unfolds in a similar way, which is the visiting team, like a similar way to the way the men's tests usually do. Visiting team finds it hard, make a low score. Home team makes 400 odd, bowls them out, wins by an innings. It was remarkable how this panned out. There was a moment when it was in the balance and when it was interesting when Talia McGrath was batting in that third innings and they pushed into a lead, and it was like, could this lead be compelling enough to really challenge India? And maybe if it had been another 60 or 70 runs on it, it would have been, but it didn't work out that way.
Even that felt familiar. It was like, well, if Australia bat for one more session, how many times have you said that in India? If Australia bat for one more session, the game could be different, and then they collapsed in the second dig, having played commendably to that point, those 2 partnerships, Talia McGrath and Elise Perry adding 70 odd. Then it was Healy batting with McGrath after that, wasn't it, for 70 more or thereabouts, and Beth Mooney gotten off to a pretty good start, having run out Litchfield for a diamond duck in the first over of the entire Test match. So, yeah, Australia 219, McGrath twin 50s, 50 in the first dig and 72, 73 in the second. For India, they had a whole slew of players make 60-something in their test against India. Well, there's improvement. A bunch of them made 70-something this time. Smithy Mandana made 74, Jemima Rodriguez 73, Deepti Sharma 78, then Risha Ghosh 54, and Pooja Vastrika, what a great match she had, made 47 after taking, I think it was 4 wickets in the first dig, a couple in the second dig. Snow Rana took 7 wickets for the match. I covered her test debut at Bristol in 2021, I think it was.
We've both been on that train since the very beginning.
Like her a lot.
Very, very definition of a final word favourite. She just scraps, and she does it batting, she does it bowling, she doesn't give up. She has this ability to influence games. I couldn't admire her more.
They talk a lot with her about having gotten super fit, having been a problem earlier in her career, that she wasn't as fit, she couldn't string games together, and got herself into a position now where she's one of the first picked in that Indian side. Harmanpreet contributing with the ball, picking up a wicket 2 balls after trying to get and obstructing the field. Dismissal go her way when piffing the ball at the stumps, and very Harmanpreet for it to break her way. Just with the Australian bowlers, so Kim Garth bowled 14 out of 126 overs, with India making 400 plus. Ash Gardner bowls 41 of the 126. Fair enough. Must have bowled. I didn't get to see much of the Indian batting innings, but 4 for 100 from 41. She's clearly been the banker there.
Yep.
But King bowled 19. Jonathan bowled 18, tidy overs. King was wicketless. Cheadle only 9. Perry only 4. Garth only 14. Quite common in India where your second and third seamers don't do an awful lot of work. They could have done with Amanda Jade Wellington.
Yeah.
Turning it square on a pitch that was giving. The biggest of the Australian spinners, and by that I mean the one who can generate the most turn.
Yep.
She could have been a factor there, as we've seen a little bit of her in Test cricket before, but not to be.
Yeah, it often seems a waste picking one of those faster bowler spots where they're just not required. The classic kind of was it Ishant Sharma used to have a few of those games, or
Saranga Lakmal in Sri Lanka. He had entire Test matches where he bowled like two overs as captain
in the first innings,
and that was that. But
good times.
I'm encouraged though, Jeff, that what this Test match has done. So India winning 2 Test matches in 2 weeks has totally kick-started the conversation around more than one Test in a series for women, and how we block them in better. Like the idea of using the pre-Christmas window as an annual Test in India, brilliant. Or somewhere else for that matter.
But the timing was hard. Like I was frustrated because I wished we'd been able to do daily shows for this, and it was just that it was literally the days leading up to Christmas, and we are actually human beings with families and friends to take care of, and it was like we just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. We just couldn't. It just wasn't possible. Crammed in between the tests that we'd just done in Perth, the one that was coming up in Melbourne, and trying to get 36 hours that we could actually spend being human beings.
That's true, but where it could work is in had and this is the idea that I've had kicking around, because we did have this in England this year, where the women's Ashes Test match was spliced in between 2 men's Test matches, and it did feel great. Like there was this momentum around red ball cricket having 15 days in a row. It would have worked out to be, because both of the men's tests went to 5 days where there was Test cricket on. Is there a way between Perth, if Perth is the pre-Christmas test into the future, as we think it probably will be, and Melbourne, to use those days before Christmas to play a women's test in Australia? Now, the challenge here will be, and let's go back to the comments from Nick Hockley, right? Nick Hockley has now opened the door to 3 Test match series. He said it on SEN this week that for marquee series, they are open to trying to advance this conversation. If you're going to play 3 tests in a series against England or India, and I think that's, when you hear marquee, that's what it's code for, then they're going to have to play them around the men's test. It's almost, the way the schedule is. So we're going to have to get creative there. But the other thing that we've talked about forever, and players too, is that if you're going to play more Test cricket, you need domestic red ball cricket. And this is now kicking on as well. It's great. I mean, this week there's been some chat around the WBBL being shortened slightly to enable some multi-day cricket for women. I don't agree with that. I understand why people are frustrated about the idea of cutting the WBBL short as a premier product. The WNCL's where they could get creative. They've only just moved to double round robin in the last couple of years. Before that, they weren't playing enough 50-over cricket. Why don't we go back to single round robin in the 50-over stuff and have the other half of the WNCL be 3 or 4 day cricket? Or alternatively, just add a 3 day comp Doesn't have to be a whole season. You can have 2 groups of 4, bring in a Caxi. So we've got the ACT Meteors in this tournament anyway, in the WNCL. Bring in a Caxi, have 8 teams. Everyone plays 3 4-day games, and the 2 winners of the 2 groups play in a state final.
Yeah.
That'd be enough. That's something.
I'm okay with the idea of shortening the WBBL because I think it's time to do that. I think when it was inaugurated, 59-game season is massive, for one thing. I mean, we've covered a few WBBL seasons in full. They're exhausting. There's a huge amount of matches. It's too much for almost anyone to follow, even the people whose job it is to follow it. A 59-game season, because it still has to be crammed into a shorter period of time.
Sure.
So it's a number of matches. It's not a game a day. They're playing double headers, triple headers. They had, in the first couple of seasons, they had teams playing twice in a day. They have teams playing back-to-back days. You have a lot of neutral teams playing in cities that neither of them are from, at outgrounds where nobody cares and nobody wants to go, because it's hard to market that many matches. It's hard to actually get an audience and get a broadcast slot for that many games. And the reason that there were that many games, and it was correct, was that they needed a lot of high-level cricket for the players to develop, for the next level down players to be able to play against good players frequently and build up the skill base, and that's been successful. They've done that now. So if you then take some of that space and allocate that to a different format, it's not making fewer opportunities. There are still opportunities for everybody to play, but you don't need as many games in that specific WBBL league. And I think that then you'd be able to market the remaining games. You trim off whatever it is, 10% of it or whatever it might end up being. You take them down to 10 games each instead of 14. Then you can use resources more efficiently to promote the games that are left and to make those a bigger occasion, because there aren't as many games. It's not like, well, I can go and see the Strikers play 5 times in the next 2 weeks in this city. It's like, well, you have to take the opportunities you have because that's when the games are on. So I think it could make it much more effective in terms of crowds and in terms of broadcast numbers, because there are some dross games. There are the games in early afternoon in the middle of nowhere where nobody cares and nobody's going out to Casey to go and watch
on a work day, 2 in the afternoon,
to go and watch a 2 p.m. start for a Stars 6 game that's being
sure,
like particularly with the out of town teams as well.
I think what you're saying, it's a good point. It's a really good point, and I hadn't considered it that way. It's just that it won't be. There'll be too much blowback. I guess I'm thinking about it in a pragmatic way of, if you start talking about reducing the WBBL, you're going to get on the other side of the debate, why are you reducing women's cricket?
Because it'll be a better product.
No,
in the same way that reducing the men's comp.
I hear you, but I can see where that debate will go, and it won't be pretty.
Sure.
So I can see where, and remember that Belinda Clark doesn't support women's Test cricket, right? Like she's on the record saying she doesn't want to have any of it. So sorry, I might be exaggerating there. That she doesn't see it as being
viable.
Doesn't see it as being the thing that's going to drive women's cricket forward. This is a player-led thing, right?
Yeah.
And CA are a little bit late to the party, but good on them for getting there. The ACA have been big on this for a long time as well. I really admire Elisa Healy and her generation of players who have been forthright about this when it wasn't popular to talk about it quite so much, when they were, broadly speaking, at odds with the administration. So, if it means just adding to what they've currently got. The other point here is that every women's state player is a professional cricketer now due to the MOU. Has been for since 2017 technically, but even more so after the latest MOU. Like, my view is that make them play more cricket.
Yeah.
That would be a good... So in addition to the 14-game WBBL and in addition to the WNCL as it is, if we, as I say, 2 groups of 4, bring in a Caxi, they have 3 or 4 day games and a final, that isn't going to materially change the lives. Like, it's not going to... It's 12 extra days of cricket a year for players who do a lot of training and nowhere near as much playing as they might like to.
There is space in the home.
It does feel that way. Even look at England. There's 2... white ball comps in addition to the 100, right? So I think there is space in their room if they wish to find it. It'll all come down. All of this, by the way, will come down to the broadcasters. Maybe not quite so much a domestic piece, but 3 Test match series in Australia, it would need to be put on television, and that costs money.
Yep.
That would be the next step of this. If CA are wanting to have a 3-game Women's Ashes Test series in addition, as part of the multi-format point system, which, by the way, India said no to the Test being in the multi-format point system for the trophy last week. Fucked if I know why, but they did. But if they want that...
They've got 3 separate trophies being played for. Yeah.
They've got to find the space and the resources for it, which is, I guess, never a straightforward conversation. Final word, Adam Collins, Jeff Lemon. Our 2023 year in review is coming up. Before we get there, for the last time as well, a little bit of...
Nerd pledge? I don't know. Do I yell it out in the park? Would that be
kind
weird?
of a weird... Yeah, it would be weird. We've seen plenty of, as you said up earlier, dog walkers. We are, next to a cemetery as well. You've got to be mindful of these things.
Well, the people in there are generally not too fussed about things, has been my experience of cemeteries. People outside cemeteries are much more worried about cemeteries than people inside cemeteries. That's generally been the way that it's looked. But Nerd Pledge today is going to involve a friend of the show, Craig Mort, not the former Socceroos skipper, but we like to pretend that he is, repeating pledger. He sent through a Julio, which is just a flat standard number, but he said the number's not important. Let's call the number 0, because he said this is an open pledge, no number per se. Maybe it gives you a chance to mix it up. The clue is an invitation to choose a number that provides for a story for each of you of one of your favourite matches that captivated you or led you to fall in love with the game as kids. And I think, I've talked about this on the show a bit before, but mine's less as kids, this is more like late teenage years. But if I was sending in a Nerd Pledge number, it would be $16.33. and my clue would be something like the streak and how it ended, because...
16 test matches and
33 wickets is how many Harbhajan Singh should have had, except Steve Waugh slapped the ball away off the stumps with the palm of his hand and got given out handled the ball, and it wasn't attributed to the bowler.
So you'd be one of those pricks who we'd have to spend fucking 7 times. Who I adore every single one of them. But some of the numbers that have came in.
You'd be like 33. Where's the 33?
Where's the 33 from? Means nothing. How are we meant to work that out?
He took 32 wickets in the series. Could be Harbhajan with 32. Like, no, it should be 33 because morally it was 33.
I understand. That's very funny. I like it.
It was the first moral, my first moral experience of cricket where I was like, morally that's wrong. You should be able to have a handled the ball attributed to the bowler if the effect is stopping you from being bowled. He was about to be bowled. The ball's about to bounce onto your stumps.
Good point.
Why isn't it given to the bowler?
We should bring handled the ball back.
Yeah. Now it's obstructing the field now.
Well, now, we might have talked about this the other week. Now that obstructing the field has such a wide remit, I think unintended consequences that let's bring back handle the ball and make it a dismissal to the bowler. That might have unintended consequences.
Sure.
As well, by the way,
because the only I suppose it's a bit different if you're the sort of Michael Vaughan one where you're picking it up off the pitch. But usually it's a player trying to whack the ball away from the stumps.
Give the umpires discretion to give the wicket to the bowler if they see fit.
Yeah, if they believe that it was a bowler-induced error, which in this case it was. It was a false shot. It was played down into the ground.
Yep.
It bounces over. It's heading for the stumps and so on. But that was I'd watched cricket before. I'd followed the cricket before. But that was a series where I was like, Test cricket is the best thing in the world. Mm-hmm. This is bloody incredible because it was I was a bit later to the party. I didn't pay that much attention through when I was really young and that kind of late 80s, early 90s bit where Australia were shit house and getting pumped a lot.
On the way up, I would say that on the way under Alan Border.
Right, but there's for people say 7 or 8 years older than me, there's this, they still remember the hurt of being bad in the 80s.
Yep.
And so all of the wins in the 90s and the 2000s, they're like, good, more, give me more. They're greedy for it. They've got a gap that they can't quite fill, which is that they remember being bad.
I remember a conversation just like this. Well, it would have been 21 years ago yesterday when on day 5 of the 2002 Test match, Australia came back chasing about 120 or thereabouts. The day where Steve Waugh was out from the no ball from Steve Harmison, then given not out when hitting one they didn't appeal for, then eventually goes on to get dismissed, but still Australia get over the line. And I was basically barracking for England. I'm like, wouldn't this be brilliant if England won from here, defending 130, let's say? It would be a great Test match. And by that point, I'd probably grown out of my barracking for Australia part of my life and was more just like loving the game. And in doing so, this guy next to me said, "What are you talking about, mate? I remember what it was like. You never say that. Never. You should never feel that way." I'm like, okay, interesting. And that was because he, as he explained, he'd been through, as a fan, the hurt of the 80s and seen Australia lose to England. Whereas for me, and this kind of relates to my formative experiences too, really. My first memory of watching Test cricket is being allowed to watch the highlights, I guess, in 1989. Very little, but I must have got they released these coins of all Australian Test cricketers in that series. It might have been a bicentennial thing actually from 1988.
$1 coin.
But my dad helped me collect these coins.
Yeah.
of these test players and this test series. I remembered 88, 89 only a little bit, the broken jaw with Jeff Lawson, which we've talked about before, and kind of having it on in the background. But 89 Ashes, like my sense of, they're playing somewhere else, right? And watching highlights in the morning. So all I ever knew was Australia beating England.
Right.
And that extends to 1994. And this, well and truly by then I've got the bug, but the day I attend of Test cricket in 94, this came up during the week, so I may as well tell that story very quickly. Day one, Boxing Day, wasn't day one, that was day two. As we've talked about on the show before, Christmas Eve was the first day because Boxing Day was a Monday, and I didn't want to have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday test match, which, 25, whatever it is, years on, seems weird too, because no one knows what day of the week it is between Christmas and New Year.
No.
If a test was starting on Monday now and it was Boxing Day, it would make no difference whatsoever.
We don't know what day of the week it is anyway at a test.
I wouldn't have a clue what day it is.
Day 0 through day 6.
I know it's Sunday right now. I don't know why I know that. Normally, I wouldn't know what day New Year's Eve is. Anyway, and so I listened to day one on my grandfather's radio. I can picture myself sitting there. His horse racing radio, I commandeered for the afternoon. I remember Mark Waugh getting out for 72. I remember sort of listening and absorbing, because Mark was my favourite player by then, of course, absorbing all of the day's play and then desperately wanting to go, and my dad agreeing that we would go on what became day 4. And that day 4 was, I went with my mate Robert and his dad Bruce and my little brother Ben and my dad Daryl, and the 5 of us went along to the G. And
Robert the Bruce, he's the guy who took over from Mel Gibson at the end of Braveheart.
Oh, right. Okay, there you go.
The guy in the big like furry cloak thing.
They probably do have a Scottish. Come to think of it, they probably do have a Scottish background, that family. And David Boone bringing up his 20th Test ton. I remember being fascinated by Phil Tufnell bowling like his 43rd over, thinking, he's going to bowl a whole one-day internationals worth of overs here. He finished with 49, I think, again, 48 or 49. Boone's 20th 100 was a milestone moment, acknowledged accordingly by the Melbourne crowd. And then Flemmo.
Future Travis Head.
And then Flemmo playing his first Boxing Day test, getting Gooch with an underrated delivery, the one that moves away and kisses the edge on the way through, and Hick with an absolute screamer before the close of play. Cricket Australia often posts that. But he was Victorian, bowling at the G, running in, doing his thing and reducing England to sort of 3 for not many overnight. And of course, the next day there's the warning hat trick, which we weren't there for. But even though I had watched so much Test cricket by that point in my life, actually being there and experiencing it firsthand, this week was the 154th Test match I've been to, which is a pretty big number. It was the 50th Test I'd commentated on radio as well, which is also a pretty big number. But it all starts there at the G. And that's why whenever I come back to this ground or to this city to watch Test cricket, I always think about being a 10-year-old boy and the influence that had on my life.
So you might throw in like a $4.90 for the 49 overs that Phil Tufnell bowled.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe, it would be something related to that day for sure. Speaking of, Michael Bevan played in that Test match, Jeff. And Michael Bevan is our guest at our live show, which we have failed to plug in the first segment. We should do retrospectively here. We have got a live show on the 7th of January, which is going to be held at the Comedy Store in Sydney. There are tickets still available. And I've been given some good material to use in the questioning of Bevo because, that's the way Damien Fleming is. Told me, ask him this, ask him that. So we will.
Okay.
We will do this.
We'll also ask him whether he got thrown through a roof by Jared Croker.
We will ask him that as well. We will reflect back on our most recent story time, which was very funny, that edition, the one that came out yesterday at Storytime 164, the bits around Rugby League Ireland and so on, and what happened in 1997 when the Canberra Raiders came to play with the Australian team after hours. Yeah,
but that'd be you and that'd be me. It'd be that Harbour. I just remember being transfixed by how one bowler could take so many wickets. I'm like, how can this one guy just be ripping through them time and again? And the fact that this Australian, in my experience, they were a bunch of triumphalist pricks who were always like lording it over everybody else. And I was delighted to see them lose. I was like, that was fun. That was exciting. That was interesting.
I was sucked into Final Frontier stuff. I was barracking for Australia in 2001. And I stressed
I didn't realise that. I genuinely didn't have the historical knowledge to know that was way more difficult. I was just like, well, this Australian team flogs everybody, so they will continue to do so. And then they did in Mumbai. It was total confirmation bias. I was like, well, look, they're just too good. They thrashed India, Gilchrist 100, Hayden 100, won by an innings. And you're like, they're just going to stomp through here. And then they get turned over. And it was couldn't have been more exciting.
I got driven back home from school by a teacher who really probably shouldn't have been doing this, because I said to him, I became mates with my teacher, basically at Warrnambool where I was studying at the time. I said, I really want to get home to watch the first ball of this series. Can you nip me home? And he dropped me home. So I watched the start of the Mumbai Test match, which Australia were 5 for 100, 5 for 99 when Gilchrist walks in, I think it was. Maybe 5 for 99 could be an pledge. Yeah, first Test, and Gilchrist makes that extraordinary century, and then Hayden
127 maybe.
It was just the way he did it.
Yeah.
It was just hitting against the spin. Australia in trouble, so rare as it was at the time. The second Test that you're referring to at Calcutta, another bit that I love from that. I don't know whether I've mentioned it before. Remember this coming up on Sports World when it was still very much a big part of our culture. It was the sports show on a Sunday morning, right? Keith Stackpole, who did the segment on Sports World, explained that the team from 1969, who'd won in India, had sent a fax to Steve Waugh when they'd bowled out India the first time, congratulating them on being the first team to win in India since 1969.
Don't go early on the fax.
They went early on the fax, and they'd had this fax. And I think doesn't Michael Slater might have said something similar to that in the dressing room. I think Gilly mentioned that to us on the Greatest Season That Was episode we did.
Okay.
Gilly told us that anecdote.
Anyway, that would be mine for Craig Moore. Those are our formative stories.
Yep.
And if you want to send in a nerd pledge and help keep supporting us through 2024, go to patreon.com/thefinalword. As of the end of this month, before it ticks over, we're up to 705 supporters on Patreon, so we've almost caught Shane Warne. So we want to get past the 708, but of course we'll lose a few at the end of the month because the credit cards expire. So get involved, help us get past.
Help us
SK
push
Warne.
help us put. I mean, we've kind of found our level on this, but I would really love to push ahead and get to Maruli, and
Maruli would be great.
Maruli would be a lovely
800.
thing. So we do make a lot of these programs. I don't know how many podcasts we made this year, but
About 200.
Yeah, it'd be it's probably more than that. Because think about all the dailies and all the extra eps and book clubs and archive eps and calling the shots and Greatest Season That Was.
Almost 50 in the World Cup alone.
Yeah, I'd suggest it's closer to 250 when you weigh all that up. So, and that's our full-time job. And the reason we're able to make that our full-time job is because of patrons. So be part of that. And a reminder, the Sydney live show, please come along. Please bring your friends. It's a bigger venue than we had at the corner. So there's going to be space, and we would love to, love to have a crack at selling it out, or at least having as many people in as we can for our first ever live show. Michael Bevan, Made in Heaven. Tickets in the link. Go tell people who don't know. I got some great feedback, Jeff, the other day from someone who came to our Melbourne live show and said they brought with them 2 people who had never heard of us, and they loved it so much they've immediately became subscribers to the show, and they, the live show is what's brought them into the Final Word world.
There we go.
So you can do that with some of your Sydney cricketing mates.
Good. All right, let us go to the best and the worst of 2023.
Okay.
And I think from this show's perspective, Adam, we have to start with best of 2023 must be Glenn Maxwell's World Cup, the remarkable arc of the Pakistan first ball duck, the Dutch World Cup record ton of 40 balls, the concussion, the missing the England game, and then coming back to play what has a very strong case for being recorded as the best one-day international innings ever, from 91 for 7, making 201 not out to run down a score against an absolutely rampant team. And I will not hear any of the, it was only Afghanistan. You should have been there and you should have watched how they were bowling. They were sensational
It's a really easy way to know that someone doesn't know much about cricket,
exactly.
when they go, it was only this or it was only that. That's great. You're new to the game, are you? Stick with cricket. It's a good sport.
Yeah. You'll enjoy it.
Back it in. Give it a go. From where he was, the hat-trick ball that he walked in on, the review, the hat-trick ball, when it looks like he's out league before, but he's edged it and he induces the review, as he's explained to us in the live show.
And then the review he overturns when he's given out.
The review he overturns, the stark review that isn't, the drama around it, and so on. And it has that extra layer with it being Maxie and us as well, you commentating it and me being in London and being away from it, but having that experience watching on TV, Rach running upstairs to make sure I was okay when I was just like screaming at the end. Just elated that he somehow done this. And, my Guardian coverage of that probably wasn't the most professional live blog of all time.
No.
In fact, about as far away from professional as you can get.
I read back over some of it. It was not.
Yeah,
but fair enough.
But fair enough. You can indulge in moments like that, and it was very special. It was the greatest one-day innings ever played, and seeing the rest of Australia now feel a similar way about Glenn than we do, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Him being the most popular player in Australia wasn't something I had on my bingo card for 2023.
No. And it's fickle, and who knows whether it disappears or it goes back the other way. I don't know, but I'm just saying the possibility of a Maxwell 8th Test match and beyond is.
I think he'll play in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
I think he and Hanscom will play in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
It's a long way away.
Best, worst for you?
Well, there's a lot, isn't there? I'm going to acknowledge we're not as organised this year as we have been before with the best and worst list. I'll just run through a few bits and pieces.
This is the top of the head stuff. So there are obviously some things we'll miss because we didn't have a detailed file, but it was like what can we think of?
It's what jumped out. Edgbaston final day.
Yeah.
Edgbaston final day was fucking wonderful. The fact that we thought it may not happen with all the rain, what a shame this would be.
Yeah.
Some of us might have behaved that way the previous night as well, thinking this improbable is going to be a final day. And boy, what a day it was. I mean, it was only probably 3 hours of cricket to resolve the contest, but Cummins and line at the end, England getting on a roll, Joe Root having to bowl those overs because Moeen Ali's finger was cooked, or ripped off, as it were.
Ripped open.
The way it finished beneath our commentary box with the misfield with Ben Duckett, and the podcast we did afterwards out with the footmarks and so on, or the where he slid Duckett, that is. The way Cummins responded, that awesome photo of his bat hanging in the air, parallel to his body, or to his head, sorry, and it's on the front of Gideon's most recent book about the Ashes, I'm pretty sure. So there is just so much about that day. There were other days. We were totally spoilt in England this year, though, Jeff.
Yeah.
I mean, starting at the World Test Championship final with Travis Head doing what he did on day one, and on a green seamer, which was so bloody exciting. The Cam Green catch of Shubman Gill, which probably earned us about 10,000 new YouTube followers because we took such a strident view that day, and Barat's still copping death threats about it. Which is the negative this year is the abuse of Barat on the abuse of Barat on social media from hyper nationalists is a fucking disgrace, and they should grow up.
When he put up the pictures of the Nagpur pitch as well, I mean, there's been a number of times when just the worst people in the world are getting into him.
Yeah, so but a lot of that England stuff, I reckon, Jeff, at the time, we knew it was good. We did have that conversation after Leeds, is it going to be as good as 05? But 4 or 5 months after the fact, whatever it is now, it was that good.
Yeah.
It was an extraordinary series. There were so many days. The competing ways the two sides were going about it, the way Zach Crawley batted at Manchester compared with the way that Usman Khawaja batted at Birmingham, there were all these little moments within it, some individual brilliance, the last day at Lords, the chaos, the stumping, the Stokes innings, the Australia holding their nerve, the crowd going wild. I mean, all of it, every minute of it. That last session on day 3 at Leeds where Travis Head walked out and gave Australia something defendable, only for Harry Brook to haul it down the next day under immense pressure. Wokes and Wood coming back. The way Wood bowled on day 1 at Leeds, nearly hitting 100 mile an hour. Like that, really, that is the best series we've covered, right? It has to be, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's pretty safe to say. It just tension, interest, end to end, and that's the best of it. I mean, it's just a shame that it's Big Three stuff, that gets the attention, that gets the marquee billing. The 4 tests in India, the 5 tests in England. I'd dream of seeing that kind of interest in a 5 test Pakistan series or Sri Lanka series or whatever it might be.
And I suppose that's a big negative of this year is that 2 test series are embedded now. We spoke about it on the Daily Show the other day, but the South Africa problem is getting bigger. It's a similar issue for Pakistan not getting 3 test match series other than when they play Australia and England. And even indeed we've seen 2 test match series with Pakistan as recently as 2018.
Depending who the other touring team is, right?
Yeah.
So they just happen to be regarded as the bigger fish this summer, so they got the 3.
So the gap between those who have money in international cricket and can resource it and can prioritise test cricket against those who don't have the money, who are relying on investment from the IPL owners who are selling their assets, but their soul to an extent as well to stay afloat. That feels like it's going to remain on our negative list, not just in 2023, but for years to come.
Yeah, top of the worst list for me is the Saudi Arabia spectre. One of the worst regimes in the world, and also the leaders of the biggest polluting bloc wanting to use their rivers of cash that they're making from destroying the planet that we all live on in order to improve their reputation. If you want to improve your reputation, why don't you do things to change the things about you that people despise?
Quit with the beheadings might be a good start.
Maybe a bit of that and a bit of actual sustainability action rather than just all of this smoke and mirrors bullshit that the big polluters are doing, where they're like, look, it's green hydrogen, look, it's some other specious bullshit. The overall point is they just want to keep selling as much shit as they can to make as much money as they can, which we're still doing here with all the coal we're digging up and the gas that we're exporting and all the rest of it as well. I'm very cognizant of that. There are levels of extremists, and the spectre that they're just going to buy out as much of the sport as they want, holus bolus, is extremely depressing.
Yeah, it seems inevitable that that'll be the case. On pollution, that week in Delhi, oh my days. That week in Delhi, I'll never forget.
I don't know how you can make players play in that. I mean, when the air quality index is 300 plus and the warnings are do not go outside, and then you're like, please go and perform elite sport for our enjoyment for 5 days of this.
When Barat stormed into my room and thought I was dying, wasn't a high point of my year. When I couldn't take it anymore. It was just seeping into my eyeballs and my bones and all the rest of it.
Best for me, watching India's quicks through the World Cup. My God, they were just so good and just dismantling team after team after team. And that point, the England game where they only have 230 to defend, and you're like, oh, England might actually win one here. And
by 100 runs.
Just absolutely monstered them.
I think because we love those Indian quicks so much too, right? I feel like Siraj has been someone we've been talking about for so long.
And he's impossible to dislike. He's just got such a genial personality. He's so happy,
but he gets up
so
and
upset. And
I like both sides of Siraj. Right, he seems all nice and kind and considered, but also he gets up batters, and we don't want to not have bowlers do that.
But he gets angsty when things don't go his way. The edges happen. He hates people dropping catches. He's also a horrible fielder himself. There's a whole complex Siraj story.
Bumrah getting back in time for the World Cup, having missed so much cricket this year, was part of that. And Mohammad Shami having one of the great World Cups, and he's had one of the great World Cup careers. He won't finish with a World Cup medallion, which, I don't know how you want to frame best or worst. It's a very significant moment in 2023, is that India, having bossed the group stage and having dominated the tournament to that point like no team has ever dominated a World Cup. Even Australia in 07 didn't dominate to that extent. No. To fall on the last day, and that's from an Australian, for Australia's team, a very significant moment in their history. Pat Cummins' captaincy that day, the 22 bowling changes, the way that he agreed to a plan. Dan Brettig, great bit of information in his piece this week that Pat made his mind up in South Africa when he came over to watch those one-dayers over there. That's when he made his mind up that we're not going to try and bother bowling Yorkers at the death. It's a waste of time anymore. We're going to bowl into the pitch cutters, and we're going to back it the whole way through the tournament. And that was... The extreme example of that was the World Cup final when everyone was taking pace off the ball, and it worked a treat.
On the worst list, just the complete lay-down lack of action about Afghanistan from the ICC, who've just given up. They don't care. Again, it's not the people who work at ICC Towers, it's the member boards. It's led by the BCCI and whoever else is falling in behind them in that block to be like, no, we're quite happy to have Afghanistan's vote as a full member in our pocket. We'll back them. We don't care that they've literally banned more than half their country from, not only playing sport but basically appearing in public, being educated. It's a horrific regime, and they're just the other member countries are fully in bed with it and just happily playing friends with the Taliban, which is a disgrace. And the only time that there was any resistance to that was when Australia said no to playing a bilateral series against Afghanistan, but a bilateral series that would have compromised their players' participation in the IPL. Let's not, an inconvenient bilateral series. So, and they were already qualified for the World Cup in an automatic position by that point. I'm not saying that it was only that. I do believe that people that are involved in Australian cricket have tried to do the right thing there, but if they needed the win, i.e. as it was at the World Cup, as it was at the World Cup, I still ponder what would have happened if Australia had qualified automatically for the semi-finals before the Afghanistan game, whether it would have gone ahead. I think they wouldn't have set a precedent of not playing in World Cups because then they might be in a position in future where they need those points against Afghanistan. Yeah, that's it. But so it's a pick and choose thing going on there. A worst that became a best, Maurice Newman's column about Pat Cummins. When Pat was on the way back to say goodbye to his dying mother, writing that ridiculous diatribe from a ridiculous human being, full stop. And, the fact that he's even still got
the ability to participate in the national conversation says a lot about Australia, truth told. But, how many times did he use woke in that column? Only for Cummins to have one of the great years as a leader. Mentioned the World Cup already.
And a player. Topped the world for wickets, overtook Stuart Broad
in
the last Test match.
Oh, I didn't know he got to the top in the end. But yeah, the 10 for 97 at the end, the way he's bowling career best right now, and having bowled really taken the toughest role in the World Cup, bowling in the middle overs and basically trying to sacrifice his own ability to bowl fast and find edges and hit stumps in favour of bowling at an economy rate that would be suitable.
I didn't check the list, but from memory, Broad was 39. And
38, I think Broad's 38. So if
Cummins was within 10, I think he did. I haven't checked it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So, but still, Cummins having one of the great years as an Australian captain after all of that absolute bullshit. He wasn't the only one, but he's the one that stands out the most, owing to the way it was responded to at the time. And I'm still keen for a journo to pick up the phone, and maybe we should, not that he'd answer our call, but to get his comments on Pat Cummins now. You were pretty had a lot to say in February, mate.
Yeah.
What do you think now?
Just gone through with a highlighter through this column and have a few points to put to you. In terms of best stuff, I mean, there are a lot of things through that the India Test tour. Todd Murphy 7 for on debut.
The way he worked over Jadeja on debut, so clever. And I agree. Todd Murphy at Nagpur, but Todd Murphy full stop.
Yep.
That is fun. Knowing that we're going to get to watch a guy play Test cricket for the next 15 years, on and off at the start with Lyon, but then after that, it could be anything.
Yeah.
And we've seen the start.
Sure. And like a slightly odd, different, young, bespectacled, quiet sort of dude coming in from country cricket and dominating over there. There was a lot going on during that series. It's a personal one for me. Someone mentioned this the other day. Henry Porter sent us a message the other day, and he was like, my highlight of the year was when I gave Dinesh Karthik a fisherman's friend while we were doing commentary. I didn't give it to him. I just had them because, so if a fisherman's friend is a throat lozenge that is incredibly strong. They're like licorice and menthol. They're fucked up. They taste like there's a plastic fire in your mouth, but they're very, very effective. And I don't know if it's is it an Australian thing? Do they have them? They probably have them in the US and so on. But if you're used to it, then you know what you're getting. And so they're good for keeping the throat calm. They were sitting on the desk and he was chatting away and he just reached out and grabbed one and popped it in his mouth, and it was extraordinary. Like, he's on mic, on air, and the response, like, he's just kind of and he's coughing.
Thought it was a butter menthol, copped a fisherman's friend.
Exactly, and he's like trying to spit it out into a receipt, and the whole thing, as Henry said, it wasn't quite the Naga chili, but it was a reasonable second best.
We've got a habit of thinking that things come from Australia that actually don't. Rachel always pulls me up on it. A couple of years ago, Cadbury chocolate, everyone. It's like, mate, give it a spell.
Yeah. Don't they have a factory in Tasmania? Maybe that's why we think it.
Yeah, that's why I thought.
We just assume that
the Tassie factory I thought was where the home of Cadbury was. Right. Quite naively, in hindsight. There was something else during the week where my uncle made reference to the fact that jelly beans come from Australia, and Rachel's like, no, they don't. They don't.
Where everything comes from Australia. Crowded House comes from Australia. Farlap comes from Australia. Clary Grimmett. Pavlova. It's all Australian. The Tasmanian footy team should be Cadbury purple, shouldn't they?
Yeah. I think they're going to be called the Devils, aren't they?
Probably, but they should be called the Chockies.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Go the Chockies.
Go the Chocks.
Yeah.
Other bits and pieces here. Look, there are some down the list of full members. We naturally focus a lot on those countries because they don't get the attention they probably should. Ireland's an example of that. Afghanistan's another. In the negative this year. Bangladesh another. Zimbabwe another. It's not been a great year. Bangladesh having a low-key, hideous World Cup. They were the greatest disappointment of the World Cup, playing in conditions that weren't foreign to them, having played so well at home in the World Cup Super League, only to totally botch it. You could argue that Shakib, doing the timed out dismissal of Angelo Matthews, made them, for us at least, that gave us a great day of an entire podcast.
It's best off for us and worst off for others.
Yeah, that's it.
Timed out.
But Ireland missing out on automatic qualification when they played so well for the 2 previous years, not being able to do the job against Bangladesh at Chelmsford. Zimbabwe losing series after series at home and failing to make a 20-team World Cup next year.
I know.
When I was in Zimbabwe in 2018, it was so much positive energy, and that just seems to have dissipated. The Windies.
Yep, the Windies, but going nowhere, not even being at the World Cup, and drifting in that direction of travel. And then the Dutch are in the best of the not just the fact that they made the World Cup finals, the 10-team version, but the way they did it, the way they stormed there, the fearlessness of like, doesn't matter, we're just going to go out and crash bang at home in that last game when they needed to run it down inside 45 overs and did.
But there's something there, isn't there, with the Dutch, and the shame there being that no more World Cup Super League. So the complexity of that, which will affect Scotland, who we did an entire show on Scottish cricket. Another country where there's stuff going on, exciting stuff. Off the field, they're getting their act together as well, which is encouraging. We're having had a torrid time through their own racism review. But yeah, we'll continue focusing on those countries as much as we can. Uganda making a World Cup's a positive. Awesome. Who would have thought that? You know, none of us would have realised they were even a chance of making a World Cup 5 years ago. And here they are making the 20-team competition next year.
Best of Chamari Atapatu's 2023 owned the year. So her Sri Lankan team, where it's really been her and 10 passengers so often in the past. They went to Bangladesh, beat them in a one-day series and a T20 series away, which is no small thing. Beat New Zealand in a one-day international series, beat England in a T20 international series. She gets overlooked in the Big Bash draft, gets picked up as a replacement player late in the piece, and she's player of the tournament, 500 runs, 9 wickets. I mean, she's 33 years old. She has put in for year upon year upon year upon year without a great deal of joy and success. You know, you look at her match list, and then if you filter it by wins, I think she's won 18 ODIs out of the nearly 100. She's really put in the work, and it warmed my heart to see all of that come off this year.
Genuine green shoot. She also dominated the Fair Break Invitational for the second year in a row, leading run scorer there. Fair Break was a wonderful fortnight in Hong Kong, and more power to the team there, and looking forward to seeing what they do in 2024. But there were stories like that, right? So the Sri Lanka piece to this, when they beat England, that was immediately after England had run Australia as close as they have in a multi-format points system for the Women's Ashes going back to 2014, right? I mean, I know England won the first one, but since then, England have never really... I know they were level on points in 2017, come to think of it, but that Australia had wrapped it up, and it didn't feel like... This felt closer, right? England's performances, rallying as they did, felt significant, and Nat Siver having another monster year. Nat Siver Brunt, brilliant. Heather Knight batting with Kate Cross at the end of that one day where they chased down 250 odd on, with an over to spare, was a really exciting. Remember watching that with Winnie, and personally that feeling like a big deal, like Winnie watching the end of that game with me, not necessarily knowing what was going on, but having an appreciation for a game of cricket that was being played by women, and you need to have those big high-profile finishes and so on, Grand Slam finishes, and we saw them. New Zealand, haven't had a great year with their women's team, but they've contributed to Pakistan and Sri Lanka enjoying success, and part of their stories. We spoke about this last week, but Pakistan's women winning a series in New Zealand is a massive deal, and Sri Lanka as well. And then Sri Lanka, as you said before, beating England after being, all the attention is on how England will spifflicate Sri Lanka, having ran Australia so close, only for them to get turned over in the T20s 2-1, and it could have been 3-0 if not for the rain-affected first T20. England have had some good things happen to them as well. Mahika Gore, Lauren Fowler coming through the first part of that, a fair break story too. But in some parts of the women's cricketing world, it does feel like the threads are getting closer together. And
Bangladesh knocking off South Africa into that as well. But Bangladesh women, extraordinary for them. And I loved the Siva stat where I think it was no one else had made 4 one-day centuries against Australia. She made 4 in 5 innings.
Well, there was a World Cup, wasn't there, earlier in the year, which wasn't in that format, but the Women's World Cup having South Africa make it to the final. There's a positive there. The national team is capable of mixing it with the best of them. They nearly beat Australia there. The downside is that they've had retirements because, well, guess what? Cricket South Africa haven't got their act together for the umpteenth time, and they've lost to Dave Van Niekerk and all of that. I think that's a negative of the year. Van Niekerk being sacked from the side before the World Cup for on relatively arbitrary fitness standards that they were setting to, I think it's reasonable to say, to get her out. And now we've got Shabnam Ismail, who's also...
I reckon that was more to get Lizelle Lee out. That they were starting to pull up that fitness stuff. But
Danae's made
your
collateral
10K time trial result doesn't have a lot to do with the cricket match.
Well, I think this was the 2K trial that she come back from that broken leg the previous year. And anyway, the point is that them losing Danae Van Niekerk at age 30 is a massive loss, and having then gone on to make a World Cup final, what they might have done had she been available.
I reckon it's a worst of the year for me. It's a thing that people remember, but that Lord's Day, the Carey Bairstow Day was so ugly. and so unpleasant, and the response to it was so ugly. Like, I really resented the thing of being accused of parochialism in it as well, because I remember getting smashed up in 2019 by Australians because I defended the Lord's crowd with the Steve Smith thing when they said everyone was booing Steve Smith because he went off when he went off injured, and we
defended the Lord's crowd and we defended Jofra Archer that night, and we both were
got barrelled for it,
treacherous for doing so.
Fine, but I was like, well, look, I was there. Whoever was listening on TV, you weren't. You had some TV mics that were near, like maybe there were 100 people doing it, but the rest of the crowd wasn't. Like, you can't actually make the assumption that you made. 4 years later, totally different story. Not everybody was being a dickhead, but a huge proportion of them were, and it was so ugly, and it was so self-righteous and so condescending, and so like, we are the ones who will decide how this game should be played. And I don't know, it just... I found it genuinely upsetting that day, and sort of when I look back on it now with some hindsight, I feel like that was like, yeah, it spiced things up and it put a flame under the series and so on, but you didn't need that. That was already there. We'd already had a classic at Edgbaston. We could have had another classic at Lords without all that bullshit, but it just felt, it still feels kind of tawdry that it was so ugly and so aggressive and so pointless and so, so needless, just because he didn't agree with a decision, the decision made to enact a dismissal that someone didn't agree with.
Yeah, it was the moment of the year, I think, in terms of the thing that we'll think about and look back on, which I agree, it's crazy that it is the moment of the year, but such are the quirks of the sport, I suppose.
And blaming the punters, saying, it was because there were cheap tickets on day 5, when the worst part of the day was in the long room. I don't recall there being a lot of £25 ticket punters being let into the long room, where the lords and the baronets and the chancellors and whatever else are hobnobbing around. That was... They need a few more mirrors in that place, so people can have a look at themselves.
I feel for the MCC. I feel for the people in the MCC who've done such a lot of great work to make that organisation as progressive as it is in the 21st century. That there are members, there are groups within the membership, shall we say, who make that job harder for them. I ran into a couple of the MCC staff that night, and they were just gutted because they try so hard to renovate the reputation, but they were let down by more than a few of their members that day, a number of whom have been suspended and kicked out and all the rest of it. There was a women's IPL for the first time this year, and a women's PSL, although the women's PSL got reduced because of the
well, it wasn't even a PSL. They'd sort of called it something else. I mean, that's on my worst list, is that the new administration, having got rid of Ramesh Raja, they completely torpedoed what was the project that he was putting together, which was to have a big women's PSL ahead of India, get the jump on them, and make that a real signature piece of the women's tour. And instead it got turned into a small afterthought kind of sideshow. The WPL deal is a huge plus. It is massive for the women's game. So that's in the best column, and the Pakistan tanking their opportunities in the worst.
Back to India for my last contribution. A best and a worst. Well, a best and an interesting. Best when Gideon found the Pope-mobile, the Batmobile underneath the Ahmedabad Stadium, and we were all able to go out there and get photos taken in it and so on. I see that car's been utilised in the World Cup recently as well, so it's not getting to Australia anytime soon, but that was a funny, enjoyable thing. Interesting, of course, the day before. Not meant to have politics involved in cricket at all. I keep hearing this over and over again.
No politics in cricket.
No politics in cricket, but the pre-test festivities at Ahmedabad and the signage all around the ground, and anyway.
And maybe a best is like Travis Head having that incredible year, and then being the second wicket in the Mir Hamza 2-in-2, the Yorker that goes through him.
It's a late nomination, but that was bloody exciting. 4 for 16. You don't see many Test matches in Australia where the home side's struggling like that. And from our perspective, highlight of the year, the corner show. And we did a live show at London, which was brilliant at the Phoenix. It was such a great night with our London Final Word crew, and Steve Thim was just sensational. But then our homecoming show in Melbourne, which kind of doubled as our 10-year anniversary, really, as a duo. And to do that in front of the better part of 300 people or whatever it worked out to be. I think more than that in the end. And selling every ticket and some. We managed to sneak some more people in at the end after it was fully sold out, and all of that kind of thing, the energy around that, the fact that we sold that out before we even told the world that Glenn Maxwell was the guest, then Glenn coming on and being in career best form behind the mic, and just being such a wonderful person afterwards, taking every selfie, doing every autograph, all the shirts were signed and so on. That was really special to do that at a venue that has been a big part of both of our lives. So thank you to everyone who was part of that, part of the London Live show. Hopefully we have a similar experience in Sydney week after next.
Yeah. So come along to Sydney, because that might be the best moment of 2024.
Who knows? Might be.
So we're about to careen into a new year, which we'll go to New Zealand for a test series. We'll have the T20 World Cup in June. I'll be in England in September for some one-day internationals and T20s and so on. I don't know. It's not as packed 2024.
It's still going to. Yeah, it's going to be a
busy
different kind of year. I've got some other projects I'm working on as well. I get back to Australia weirdly in February and in March with the New Zealand tests. In the middle of that, we've got the Sports Commission awards thing coming up in Feb, which is exciting. I don't think we'll win, but it's nice to make the last four and an industry-led acknowledgement of what we're doing, which is kind of an unusual thing. A lot of awards out there. I mean, there's the fan awards and the pretty much what's your biggest Instagram following type of shitty podcast awards that mean nothing, but this kind of does. So if we'll be at that.
The nomination, who's that? The Robin Williams kind of best actor. Like, you're not going to win it, but you're in the noms.
Yeah, we're in the noms. So that's in Feb, and then back here in March and on a couple of other projects, and we'll be in New Zealand, both working on that series and making daily shows. There'll be daily shows from the India-England series, which is coming up, Christ, in 3 weeks or something like that, which we'll be part of as well. Cam Ponsonby's been a big part of that with our dailies this year, and we'll be over in India. We'll have World Cup dailies all the way through June from America, where we will be, and the Caribbean, where we probably won't be, but we'll work that out as we go. And then, we're into another... It's not a great sport for finish lines, but we wouldn't want it to be, because this has become such a wonderful part of our lives, really, this podcast. It's not just work, it's more than that. It's a big part of our identity, and the fact that we've got so many people who listen and watch and have become part of our world and part of our orbit as a consequence through the Discord channel and through Patreon and through coming to our shows and coming up to us when they see us at cricket grounds or talking to us on social media or whatever it is. It makes, cliched as it is, it makes it all worthwhile.
Patreon.com/thefinalword. Jump in for 2024, and let's say farewell from a beautiful sunny Melbourne day with the helicopters circling overhead and a few little wispy white clouds up in the blue sky. It is the last day of 2023. Jeff Lemon, Adam Collins, Happy New Year to you, and we'll see you very, very soon. Indeed.
Happy New Year.